Hello, and welcome back to our show, Marriage God's Way. I am your host, Mary Beth Maestre. So let's redo a little review from our last session. And I still want to go back to our Bible verse from Romans 12:2 and listen to it carefully. You know, you can always keep a pencil handy to jot down some of these Bible verses and go to it after the show is over. So listen to Romans 12:2. Do not conform yourself to the world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and pleasing and perfect. And as we talk, we focus on words like transform, your mind, discern, all those words that help for a marriage. For the good marriage, in fact, as we says, I added these on for myself, that is good, pleasing, and perfect in God's eyes. Just imagine, don't all of us want a marriage that is good, pleasing, and perfect? I think the answer to that is yes. We explained that looking at the way we see marriage today, the world continues to show us how to care for ourselves first, how to be self-reliant, self-sufficient, and to sacrifice for these goals. This is called the singles mentality, which is a lie from the evil one. This idea of the singles mentality. But we also saw how the world's obsession with this same individuality could be physically, mentally, and emotionally exhausting, leaving one too busy or too tired to be connected with your spouses. We compromise our marriage to keep up with the world's standards, leaving spouses emotionally unfaithful to each other. So then, if the modern world marriages work so well, why is the divorce rate over 50% even for Christians? And that includes Catholics in there. Could it just be that the singles mentality has something to do with that? Incompatibility has become the new buzzword. We are just not made for each other. We were never made for each other. We were made individually. We spoke about our identity in God. We have to work on this thing called marriage. Are we sacrificing for our marriage as we did for our individuality? So think about that. We sacrifice for this thing called individuality. Are we doing that for our marriage? And along with the singles mentality, we have another belief that once again comes straight from the evil one. It's called mutual agreement. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Okay, at this point, I'd like to welcome my guests that are with me every week, Maureen and Stanley. Welcome, welcome. And you heard me break down everything, sort of what we did last week. And I asked you that can we just go back to what those points that leads to this thing called divorce, that 50%, these feelings. We had this, do you have that? Stanley, maybe you could read that again. You read it last time. It's the right here. Why do spouses?
Okay. Mm-hmm. All right.
And listen to this carefully. You could see how this would lead to divorce. Huh?
This what I'm going to read here is underlining, the fact that the world's plan, promoted by the singles mentality, doesn't work. So, in that context of following the world's plan, why do spouses argue without even trying and have the hardest time making up? They lie in bed angry, frustrated, and sleepless. Why are most wives hardly ever ready for sex, but always ready to find fault? Why do most husbands show interest only when looking for sex and quickly lose interest when sex is over? Why do husbands feel they have to protect their privacy by hiding their cell phones from their wives? Why do their wives feel so insecure in the relationship? Why do many promising couples separate or divorce soon after marriage or later when the children are grown up? Why is incompatibility becoming the new breakup buzzword? We are just not made for each other.
Wow. So I had to repeat that because I'm sure you viewers, any one of you together, any couple together, whether in a marriage or not, can identify with one of those points there.
Oh, yeah.
Definitely, yeah. So we see it and we can say at that point, okay, well, that's point number 2. I'll take that one. Let's break up now. Time for a divorce. Any one of these. Let's have a divorce. Okay, so we'll move on because we'll see there's another lie that comes into the picture. And Maureen, you want to talk to us? We said the singles mentality, but we also spoke about the other one, which is mutual agreement, and it sounds so good.
Absolutely.
Mutual agreement. Talk to me about that.
Okay,
Maureen.
one of the things that a lot of couples mutually agree on is contraception. And I know nobody want to have a dozen children, right? So, and there's so many contraceptions on the market and that are being sold, promoted, and I think a lot of couples use contraception. But we call it, it's another trick of the devil because it doesn't bring us closer to each other. Trick because it makes us think that, yeah, I'm going to be using contraception and now I could have all the sex I want and have to worry about being pregnant and therefore, you know, sex is going to be better and that's going to make us love each other more and it's going to bring us closer to each other. So that's the big trick, the big lie. Because what happens is that, you know, even though we think that contraception enhances sexual intimacy, it does not. And for several reasons. Many a wife will tell us that the contraception that they're taking, even though she might realize what's happening, but it does affect our hormones. And the reason why it affects our hormones is that because we have male hormones, we have female hormones. And that is so perfectly, God just so perfectly put those hormones there for the man and for the woman, right? And one of our hormones is estrogen. And the contraception, what it does is that contraception, the pill, the famous pill, what it does, it actually prevents ovulation. Okay, so it's working on the estrogens of the body. And what happens is that a lot of times wives will, I tell you, I call that a trick because instead of the wife feeling more drawn to her husband sexually, the chemicals, many a wife have told me that they don't even feel sexually aroused anymore because the contraception, because the hormones in the pill and your own hormones are going against each other, and it prevents ovulation. And it's for a fact that during ovulation is when the wife feels her sexual desire is at the peak. It's heightened. So when these hormones are not in play, and ovulation is hindered, is stopped. You know, you don't ovulate. That's what happens. It just wears on the woman's body, the natural way that God made us. And instead of feeling more drawn to her husband sexually. She doesn't.
No desire.
She has no desire, right? And then another thing that that a woman is very concerned about is that, I think the man and the woman, is that suppose the contraception fails, you know, it's not 100% for sure guaranteed, not 100, yes, and so, you know, she worries over that, over the possibility of becoming pregnant, and some women have become pregnant on the contraception, on the contraceptives, and she also worries about the chemical effects on her body, not only the desire, but some women get headaches, some women, you know, they just feel lethargic, they feel they have no energy, and because it's affecting the body in a negative way.
Because the pill is a hormone itself, too.
In the hormone itself. And if you read the manufacturer's label, they have a lot of things, blood clots, you know, all sorts of fine print.
Yes.
Yes. Side effects. And so the contraceptions really undermine sexual intimacy. A lot of times, so the woman is left to handle the contraception thing on her own. Yeah. You know, she takes the pill, and the husband doesn't need to at all worry about what's, you know, he has no concern about her. And then
except that she's ready.
You better be ready. Right.
That's his.
And then they have one that's very, very that's very dangerous. Is the IUD. What the IUD, I wouldn't call it contraception because it does not prevent pregnancy. When the IUD is inserted, what the IUD does is that when fertilization takes place in the fallopian tubes, when the IUD is implanted into the uterus, so when the fertilized egg comes down and implants itself in the uterus, that is when the IUD, this foreign object in the uterus, the fertilized egg, meets this very foreign object, this environment that's not conducive to implantation of the egg into the womb. It's abortive. The IUD is abortive, and doctors do not tell women that the IUD is abortive, right? And not even talk about the once a month injection, which is a massive dose of hormones
once again,
to last a whole month. So it's a mess. It's really, really, and so that really weighs on her mind, you know, and a lot of times when contraception fails, even married couples, they agree to abortion, you know, and that is sad because that's another whole issue, you know. So,
one second, can I just add to that? So the word mutual
agreement.
Mutual agreement. So between the husband and wife, you've mutually agreed to contracept. So
or to do anything.
Any of that.
Yeah.
And then if there is a pregnancy, you mutually agree to abort as well. Go ahead from there, Stanley.
And I was going to say that this mutual agreement really started in the Garden of Eden by Adam and Eve, who mutually agreed to disobey God. And, you know, the Bible is very clear, no amount of mutual agreement between Adam and Eve made God, you know, turn his head from their sin. And much to our regret, you know, we are paying the price of Adam and Eve's sin. You see what I'm saying? Even though it's wonderful that Christ came to save us, that wouldn't have needed to happen if they didn't fall for this mutual agreement trick. The other thing which I want to say too with regard to contraception, what contraception tends to do, talking as a man now, it really reduces sex to an activity rather than a mutuality, well, not mutuality, but rather than the growth or stimulation, if you like, of oneness and celebration in our marriage. It really reduces it to an activity. And, porn exists because a sexual activity with the same person over and over and over, just after a while loses its appeal. Enter pornography to restore the appeal. So it's not really good at all, really, and certainly not aligning with God's plan, just on the basis of our mutual agreement.
And then it doesn't stay at porn, does it? Usually, after that, it's this is fun. Now let's go out and try it somewhere else. Let's have it. But something I'd like to add too, I think, for me talking about the woman, it's her job to do everything, and like we said, her job to be ready. So after a while, she feels it. She knows she's just being used, even if it's by her husband. She knows she is being used. And going right back to the word of intimacy. So now, previous sessions, we spoke of personal intimacy, not in the bedroom yet, just personal, getting to know each other and building up to what we are talking about now, the intimacy in the bedroom. But now, this singles mentality has you out there.
But it's conceivable that the first time you choose to use contraceptive, there was even a sense of intimacy. That's the lie. And then it proceeds and says, no, this is now moving into a feeling of being used, and it's mechanical now, and maybe it's time for somebody else. That's it. It's not. It doesn't lead to intimacy. It doesn't stay in intimacy. It doesn't lead to life. Period.
Okay, let's stop there. We'll continue when we come back. But consider what was just said. And good advice. Read any woman on the pill. Read the little leaflet that comes in there. Look at what some of the side effects are. We'll be right back. We're back. And I'm looking at the line once again. Contraception reduces sexual intimacy to a sexual activity. So we've been talking all along, I said before, about this intimacy first. We're just coming now to sexual intimacy. So let's continue on about this intimacy that builds up to sexual intimacy. And the word, tie it in with mutual agreement, tying in with God's plan, how this contravenes God's plan of what we're looking at.
Okay. That's quite a challenge. but let's start by saying, even though we might be mutually agreed as spouses, if that mutual agreement is not in alignment with God's plan, there is no way meaningful intimacy will grow out of that. Now we may grow up to a sexual desire, sexual appetite, whatever. But that's not going to last, because that does not contribute to, we could never grow real intimacy, which is really, something that God embedded in us, that desire for intimacy. We could never really grow into that level of intimacy, and not be aligned with God's plan. It's just not rocket science, So what we have to bear in mind is that I'm talking as a man and I'm talking for my wife as well, from experience. If we really want to enhance sexual intimacy in our marriage, we got to put our trust in relational intimacy, not contraceptive. Because relational intimacy, which is born of spiritual intimacy, it flows from spiritual intimacy with God, brings us the absolute right disposition towards our spouse. Disposition of love, of understanding, of caring, of nourishing, and everything else, which is just the absolute very best foreplay for sex.
Yeah, right.
How about that?
All the attributes of love that we spoke of, like in the first session.
Yeah.
All those attributes of love, caring, sharing, everything.
Which is all very tenderizing for both of us. It just makes sexual intimacy explode. Just better, really. Yeah. And there's no sidebar, all the side effects that could go around. No side effects. Only good side effects.
Yeah. Okay, Maureen, anything to add to that?
No, I completely agree with what Stanley was saying about the intimacy first with God, of course, and with us, is like the appetizer, the intimacy, and the more we spend time in our personal relationship with God, we keep saying this over and over because that is what it is. That personal relationship with God, and then which flows between us. But we have to intentionally, deliberately work on it. It just will not happen. We have to want it. We have to want it really, really bad, and both of us. And I would say even sometimes, even if one partner desires this intimacy more than the other, because like what Stanley said one time, at one of the previous shows, we like popcorn, not all pop at the same time. I think that the one that feels the deep desire and the call to this intimacy could start it. Could be the initiator. We don't have to wait until on each other. So I would say that definitely the as we call it, the relational intimacy, which we'll talk more about in another session. That is what I think really softens up. I like the word Stanley used, tenderizes us.
Yes.
That's a lovely word, to I feel very tender, when we
I just recall one time we were having a session with couples there preparing for a retreat, and we were talking about this intimacy thing and whatnot, and I remember saying something like, one of our friends, Michelle Perdomo's mom, was visiting, and she was in the bedroom, and we were at Michelle and Carlos's house. And we were saying, a woman is like a percolator. When you sort of really turn on the intimacy, she percolates. And Michelle's mom ran out of the room and says, "Who said that? I want to hear more about it." I want to hear more about percolating. Yeah, and I think that's it, really.
That says a mouthful there.
A woman just responds to that tenderizing thing,
that
really.
tender touch, yeah.
Yeah.
But tell that to the men.
Okay, well, a man is sitting here. Help me here. 40 years in the desert is taken to renew our mind. Go right back to where we started. That's a very important. We have to change the way we think. And the best way to think is what God tells us in His Word.
Yeah, right here.
Sometimes we have to get behind the language, which you might say is ancient and whatnot. But when you get behind that and say that, as God says, I'll teach you. I will teach you. He says that in the Bible. Then we start to really understand how things were meant to work, really.
It was his plan from the beginning. He created marriage. We're going to see that in a minute.
Yeah.
But something else Maureen just said, you have to sacrifice for it. And when I opened up the session, I used it here that people will sacrifice for their individuality. They sacrifice for their careers, for their education, for whatever it is. They give it their all, but then they just come home and expect marriage to happen on its own.
Right.
So if you can sacrifice for that individual life, as we call it, your career, your this, whatever it is, then if you want this marriage to work, it's going to be that word, sacrifice.
So we have to be intentional. Intentional, right? We have to want it, work on it, and go for it.
Yeah.
So otherwise it will not happen. It will not just happen. If we just go day by day, and we don't set a time to sit with each other and be intimate, talking to each other, sharing with each other, getting to know each other, intimacy, it's not going to happen. So we set a time in the evening that we say, okay, we drop everything, and then we sit and we spend that time. The same time that we sit and spend with God alone, we need to sit and spend with each other. Otherwise, it's never going to happen. It won't happen automatically.
No, it's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen. No,
And you know that all of that has to be superimposed by grace, which we'll talk about as we go into the other session. And that's very simple too. When we spend time thinking about it, you know, it's pretty simple. I mean, it's the what's required is simple, but not necessarily appealing for most of us. But we'll talk about that.
Yeah. But I mean, that's the grace is what we get with the sacramental marriage. That that hopefully we can, if we once we get to understand it, like you said, come out of the desert. Because for right now, most of us are not in. We're still in the desert. We haven't come out yet.
Yeah, and the thing is, you know, we're getting all this teaching from the world, and that's not being counteracted by
anything else.
Thank you. Yeah, so you really have to. A lot of times you fall in the very trap that the world sets in your real life. Like, Ashley, I've done it again, and it is not. You pull yourself out by the grace of God. So these types of teachers say, look, this is the way you need to go consistently and intentionally. And then it starts to work. It starts to happen.
I just want to say that that we are looking for fulfillment. And one of the greatest places is in marriage. You know, and but because, like you said, Maribeth, God instituted marriage. He alone, He's the best person to teach us how to be married. And I think that, and I know that God wants for us to have the best marriage that we could ever have, you know. And He will show us as long as we go to Him, and He won't let us down.
Never.
Because what He wants for us.
Yeah.
So we can.
He is promised. He says all you have to do is want it and pray for it. And I think just in terms of my thinking, what God is saying, how committed He is to answering our prayer. You know, He uses an example that I personally can't relate to. If you tell this mountain to uplift itself and be thrown into the sea. Now, why would anybody ever want to do that? But I think He's saying, look, let's talk about the ridiculous here. If that's what you really want, and you are living in me and I in you, tell that mountain to plant itself in the sea, and guess what? It will happen. So God definitely wants to bless us in marriage. We have to change the way we think. We have to believe that's what He wants to do. And pursue it. Yeah. And the pursuing, I like to think too, you know, a lot of times we emphasize cross, you know, pick up the cross and did. I think like Saint Therese said, man, that stuff is too heavy for me. I don't have the constitution, I'm too feeble. Right, I want an elevator to heaven. And the best elevator is to jump in the arms of Jesus.
Oh, how beautiful.
Which means just fall in love with God.
Jump.
You tell a story. Yeah, I could tell a story.
Yeah, sure, sure,
A couple that we knew many years ago when we were working in Martin College. This guy met his wife to be in PG. He was a teacher in PG. Met this girl, and I mean, it was kind of like, I suppose, love at first sight. And then he found out where the girl lived. She lived about 5 miles away. So this guy was very poor, right? As a teacher, and didn't have anything, but he knew a friend that owned a 3-wheel bicycle. What do we call a bicycle cart? You know what that is? Yes. That's the box, 3 wheels on the box. And he said, look, could I borrow your bicycle cart? I want to visit my girlfriend. The guy said, yes, but I use this car for my living, so you could have it after 5. Jumps on the bike after 5. By the time he gets to his girlfriend's house, which is the better part of 5 miles away, it's in darkness, everything's locked up. He looks at it, is totally delighted, takes back the 3-wheel bike and says, could I borrow this again tomorrow?
Oh my goodness.
It reminds
That's what love does. Now you look at that and say, my God, I want to meet this guy like 15 years after marriage. I said, would you do that? Hell no. But when you're in love, nothing's across anymore.
I remember when Stanley used to work in Curzal. Before he went to study, he was working in Curzal, and I live in Belize City, and he would come down every weekend on one of those trucks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the cabin was always...
You know, the trucks that we use.
Was always engaged before.
You had some planks across.
Across the back, right?
Yeah. And just planks, no cushions.
Yeah. No back either.
No back.
No.
And I never had a lot of substance, in the lower end too. No cushion. So that was like 4 hours of misery. Did I ever find it misery? No.
But look what you were coming
Thank you.
to.
Just looking forward to seeing my girlfriend.
Yes.
Never a moment of misery.
Yeah,
and that's what intimacy with God does. Mm-hmm. Jesus himself, St. Paul tells us, and I'm thinking in Hebrews, who for the joy, you know what he went through in Gethsemane? Right, good. Sweat blood. Yeah. Mm-hmm. For the joy set before him, embraced the cross. In other words, I wasn't a cross anymore.
For the joy set before.
For the joy set, and I could only think that joy is our salvation, really. Yeah. So I think once we have an intimate relationship with God, a lot of things become much easier. Even though the struggle is still there.
Yes.
Instead of going overboard when you say, "But my God, I wish this would be different." First of all, there's no plan B.
Right.
I mean, you accept.
Exactly.
You can make a plan B, but you say, guess what? No, there's no plan B.
No plan B.
For us.
And in the Catholic Church, is no plan B.
Well, who cares?
Yeah,
if you want a plan B, you make a plan B regardless. Mm-hmm. But you say, totally convicted, there's no plan B in this relationship. So we're going to work it out. And it's going to take some time. We're going to work. Because it's not we work it out. It's we responding to the grace of God. Work it out.
Okay.
For the joy set before us.
I want to say to that, there's a verse that says, with God, nothing is impossible. Mm-hmm. So as long as we invite God into it, it's possible.
Yeah, let's keep that. With God, nothing is impossible.
Nothing is impossible.
Yeah. And viewers, I'm sure all of you, whether you're still together in marriage or have been separated, can think back to a story like what Stanley just told. Somewhere in your courting or courtship days or the beginning of the marriage. Nowadays, like I said, people don't even know what that word is. But in the beginning, you have a similar story. And I would love to hear all these little stories.
Absolutely.
And what happened to make them still in the marriage or have chosen divorce and are trying it out somewhere else. But lest you think that this individual life of your fulfillment is just to be tossed aside. No, I don't want you to see it that way. That fulfillment of whatever your God-given gifts are builds up in the marriage. I have a sentence here. We need to believe that it is in our marriage that we will find self-fulfillment. Yeah. So maybe not as the individual, but together with each one helping each other, each one finds their self-fulfillment. Okay, we'll stop there on that note. We'll be right back. Okay, we're back, and I want to wrap up what we were just talking about marriage being fulfilling, that we can, our careers, whatever we're doing, which we considered individual on our own, we can fulfill it even more in our marriage. So listen to this slide. It says, contrary to modern world teaching, marriage is fulfilling if we devote time, energy, and attention to it. The same time, energy, and attention that you devote to your career, your education, whatever it is that you are on that path toward. It says, God instituted marriage, and He alone can teach us how to live in marriage. And Jesus' love alone, which changes lives, can show us how to love in marriage. So now we're going to move on, and let's look at God's plan for this marriage. Yeah? So we've been building up to this. So He does have a plan from, like you said, from the very beginning, He had this plan. So talk to us about this plan for marriage.
Well, this is, in a sense, very simple. It's wrapped up in Ephesians 5:25 to 27. Well, actually, it starts with verse 5. And since a lot of people like to say men should be the initiator, I will initiate by reading this. First of all, husbands. Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ loved the church and handed Himself over for her to sanctify her, cleansing her by the bath of water with the word, that He might present her to Himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish.
Wow.
That is a mouthful, guys, but that's what we are called to be as husbands.
And wives, as the church is submissive to Christ, so also wives should be submissive to their husbands in everything. That is our call. That is our command. That is our mandate. If we really want to have the best marriage according to God's plan, God tells us, wives, to submit to our husbands in everything. I will talk much more about that.
Okay.
All right. And will we just leave that there? We'll move on from there because we have this other one. For this reason?
Okay, for this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife, and the two shall become one body. What we want, and St. Paul continues, this is a great mystery, but I speak to Christ and the church. Okay, now it says it's a mystery, right? And I suppose it is a mystery. St. Paul is the ultimate in explaining the things of God, really. But the thing that is very important in this last reading here, this last reading from Ephesians 5, is that we first have to realize in marriage that, this is like a new beginning for us. I'm leaving the comfort, the security of living with my parents and building a new relationship with this person, my wife. And she, for her sake too, it's probably more difficult for the wife. She's living the comfort and the protection and the security of her family, her mom and dad, and saying, look, we are starting a new life. That requires a lot of faith, a lot of faith in God who designed that to be the way it's supposed to be. So that there's no falling back on parents. As I say, you don't get married unless you have a job first, You don't get married and look for a job. It's really responsible stuff, because basically the husband is now saying, you are under my protection. And there's a heck of a responsibility for that, really. I will see to it that you do well in every regard. Easier said than done. So it's very responsible. But again, it's the way God designed it. So if that's the way God designed it, it has to be
for a reason.
Sensible.
But you've been under your parents' care.
Yeah.
And usually under your parents' care, your father too has been your protector and your provider.
Especially for a girl. Huh?
For a girl.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now we are leaving that household to go over to this man who we would hope to be same thing, the provider and the protector of the household.
And St. Paul says this is a great mystery. Don't quite know what that means, but St. Paul probably contemplated a man and a woman, two imperfect beings. And says they're supposed to represent the love of Christ for the church. That has to be a mystery.
You know what is amazing? You know what is amazing? That Christ chose the love of husband and wife, imperfect, as Stanley was saying, imperfect husband and wife, to represent his love for the church. I always think, he could have chosen the love of mother and child, parent and child, because we know that a mother loves her children very much, very deeply. She carries them for 9 months, and a mother and father love their children, right? But that you could easily see that.
You could understand that one. That type of love, especially women.
Women
would understand that type of love.
He didn't choose that, which kind of comes even naturally. He chose the love of husband and wife, two different people, two imperfect people, to represent his love for his church. That's the mystery, I think, that St. Paul is talking about. I
can't get into that. Just call it a mystery.
Because the church is us, the body of people that attend.
And the church is imperfect also.
Very imperfect, because it's made up of us.
Yes.
It's made up of ones. But comparing, and as we go on to understand all the things Christ has done already for his church, which we spoke about earlier, the salvation.
Well, exactly.
We're going to talk about that, I should imagine.
Earlier in one of the sessions, I think Maureen referred to a conversation we had with Deacon Carl when he was preparing a couple for marriage. And he was listening to what the girl is expecting and what the guy is expecting. And he says, look, let me tell you something. The one main thing in marriage is that you're supposed to get each other to heaven. I said, well, that's a mouthful, because that's exactly what Jesus did. That's the love of Christ for his church. Essentially is, I want to see all you guys in heaven. Everybody. So it's kind of like saying, your job, you get your wife to heaven. And your wife, you get your husband to heaven.
But that's the number one.
Sorry?
It's number one, and nobody ever hears that.
Well, thank you. And the thing is this with God, it's that, pardon me, that's not just full of crosses. For the joy set before him, he embraced the cross. He didn't say, he didn't say, well, he very reluctantly picked up the cross and carried it, because after all, it was a cross. St. Paul says, by revelation, he embraced. And that's the mindset we have to live. We have to change the way we think, that once we tune into God, once we seek this intimacy with God, everything looks different. Because now we are seeing it through God's perspective, from God's perspective, not our cross perspective. I think we talk too much about cross. I'm not
we
trying to say anything. We have to carry our cross, but it's the mindset we need in doing that needs to change. It's not like we'll always have crosses. But if we call it a cross, guess what? It's going to be a cross. It's going to be. Jesus himself says, "Share my yoke." In other words, Jesus is that bull or whatever pull the plow or whatever.
Oxen,
Share mine. It's not put on your own. Share mine. So it's not intended to be so crossy. It's really intended to be, amen, you align with me, you hold on to me, and that cross will become delightful. That's what the saints do, really. I read a little prayer by St. Therese, and St. Therese talks about, consume me as a flame. I said, lady, take it easy. Consume me as a flame, in the flame of your love. Mamma mia. When you consume, you turn to ashes, man. You ain't nothing. She's only happy. if she is consumed in the flame of Christ's love, you see, that whole mindset, that change in mindset makes you do anything.
I guess that's what for all the saints. They were able to
Thank you.
change their mindset, so that those crosses, which they all had,
Absolutely.
every story of
Absolutely.
every
Yeah.
saint
Yeah.
had their cross, but it was changed to the joy that you're talking about, so that it was easier for them to carry that cross. Which tells us, guess what? Time for us to become saints with that mindset. People are afraid of that word.
Yeah.
Yet we all want to go to heaven, and like I always say, news flash, only saints live in heaven. So how are we gonna? I just tell at at little retreats at SCA girls, only saint. Nobody wants to be a saint till you hear only saints live in
But think about the first commandment. I'm the Lord your God. You should love the Lord your God with your whole heart, your whole soul, your whole mind, and with all your strength. And love your neighbor as yourself. I think we find later on, and love your neighbor as I have loved you. I mean, that's it. That's where everything starts. And that's so counter-cultural that we don't even go there, really. You know, we're not going there. It's all about me, really.
Go ahead,
I
Maria.
just want to say that that mindset that Stanley is talking about for the submission, the submissive part for the wife. I do believe that what's important to be submissive is a disposition. That's the mindset.
The mindset.
We
Back
come
to
with
the
a disposition of submission to our husbands, which is not forced upon us. Stanley doesn't force submission upon me. Otherwise, I would resent it. Right?
Stanley can't force
He
submission.
can't, and yes, no husband should force submission. I think a wife.
Some try.
I think we come into if a wife has a mindset or a disposition to be submissive to her husband, it's much easier than if you say, well, God told me to do this, and I got to do this, and then we'll go into having a submissive spirit. It doesn't mean being a doormat. You know, it's being obedient to God's plan, which will work beautifully when Stanley does his husbands
part.
love your wives, yes, and I do my part, then it works. So it makes a lot of sense,
And there's separate roles.
There's separate roles,
They're not the same roles for each one.
Yeah, because I think a woman, we love naturally. We love our children, we love our pets, we love everything. We love love. So when God commanded the man to love your wives, because a man might have a little bit more problem loving us, imperfect person, people, wives, and I think as wives we will find it hard to be submissive and to be respectful in the good, not in the I respect my husband in the way I treat him, talk about him, in the way I affirm him, in the way
respect is not the opposite of disrespect.
Yeah, it's more affirmation. Yeah. It's more. It's operation. It's affirmation, admiration, acceptance. That is what being submissive of. Not trying to change him, accept him for who he is, and to just be grateful, be thankful, appreciate him for the person that he is. That's not easy.
Not at all.
Yeah.
But I want to say it starts with submission to God.
Oh, of course.
Yes.
But because it says right here, you see, it says right here.
Impossible without God.
Where does it say that? As the church is submissive to Christ. Now, have you ever heard of an argument between the church and Christ? Which says, to heck with you, no longer am I going to be submissive. Not in the history of the church, that has ever happened. You have little packets of that. But the church universal has never said, well, enough of you, Christ. I will never be some. So that's where it starts.
So it starts
Yeah.
Yeah.
And God is recognizing that this is not easy, after sin particularly. But that's where it starts.
And in another verse, it says, be submissive, wives, submissive to your husbands
As unto the
as
Lord.
unto the Lord.
Oh, so it says it right there, as
unto the Lord. Again, without God, we can't do it.
And which means there are going to be many times when being submissive to this dude doesn't like me at all. Then God is saying, then do it honor me.
With in obedience to me.
Yeah, do it honor
And
me.
I will help you. I give you the grace. I give you the disposition. Yeah.
Because, I think we read this. We read the last one just now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because there are two things I like to see here. Where is it? Each one should love his wife as himself. So the man's duty is to love his wife. You were saying that and just re-emphasizing it. His duty is to love his wife as himself. And her job, and the wife, should respect her husband. Once again, two different roles. He is to love, and because he needs that, so he has to do. Whereas the wife loves already. It said it's within her nature to love.
And I've heard
So
it said,
she
you know what,
needs
and I've heard it
respect.
said that on you call these polls, these questionnaires. They ask a man, what do you want most from your wife, love or respect? And almost all of them said respect. Because that is what energizes them. That is what enforces them in their masculinity and their manhood, if we respect them. And the respect, like I said, is affirmation. A man needs affirmation. He needs admiration. He needs appreciation. Those are the things that make him really, really his best.
But I'm thinking too, St. Paul says, in any case, in other words, if you can't handle the first two verses, at least do this. Husbands, love your wives. Wives, respect your husband. But the real goal is the first two.
The first,
Yeah.
Okay. We didn't
Now, how do we do this, huh?
Didn't get very far with this, so we
Yeah.
have to come to an end.
Are we on a time?
Yes, we're at
My
the time.
goodness.
Yes, viewers.
Okay.
We'll be back next week to continue. We stopped right there, just at those verses. I do encourage you to go read Ephesians 5. Start at verse 24, or even before, to pick up next week to understand what is being said. This is the what's the word? The plan, the blueprint. The blueprint for an amazing marriage, if we could truly understand this.
A wife just said recently, it's the formula.
Oh, good. All right. There we go.
For marriage.
The formula for marriage. Marriage God's way. Okay, well, I'll leave you on that note. Thank you, viewers. Thank you for being with us with this session. We'll continue on from there. It seems to be building up and getting really exciting. I'd like to thank Maureen and Stanley for your input. There's so much that comes from this. Like you said, Stanley, not enough people talking about it, not counteracting the world's way.
Which is unending.
Which is just taking us down a completely different path. So thank you so much. We'll see you next week. Thank you, cameraman Mark and Salvador, for being here with us. And just thank you for being there. We'll see you again next week. Keep this in mind and start praying. Start praying for marriages, your own marriage, but not only that, for other people's marriages. That will help if everyone gets together praying for each other's marriage. Oh, okay. And we do have our closing prayer, so let's go ahead with that.
Okay.
Dear Heavenly Father, your word tells us that the devil, as a roaring lion, walking about, seeking whom he may devour. And we've seen it happening around us. Marriages broken under the weight of sin, couples drawn away from each other and from your truth. Good.
People are walking away from their vows, leaving a trail of destruction and pain in their wake. And so we ask for your protection, Lord, in our marriage. Be the rock beneath our feet, where the winds of discouragement and doubt beat heavy against our soul.
May your angels stand guard over us, and may we also stand firm in our faith, resisting temptation and choosing to love. Equip us to fight for our marriage as valiant warriors fight for their kingdom.
Strengthen our commitment and fortify our bond, that we may be deeply united as one. In His name we pray.
Amen.
Amen. And Our Lady of Fatima. So like I said, we dedicate this show to Our Lady of Fatima. So use her as a perfect model of marriage too, both spiritually to her spouse, the Holy Spirit, and to Saint Joseph. So you can pray to them from your own marriage and all marriages. Thank you once again. See you next time.